I first saw Spirited Away when I was in the 5th grade. The teachers at school told us, we don't have classes today, we have a very special movie to show you. And we went to the amphitheater and they handed us out popcorn and soda and turned on what looked like a cartoon. Of course it was anime, but it was a little bit different from other animes I had seen. If we can consider in this group Dragon Ball Z, Pokemon, Naruto, Yu-Gi-Oh! Well, when it comes to the creators, Miyazaki's vision, then it's always different. It's a lot dreamier in quality, I find, and what I'll say, curious. So today we are reviewing what he's announced to be his last work, a lifetime achievement, The Boy and the Heron. And I'll share some of my ideas, and hopefully you, the viewers, can give some of your own interpretations for comparison. In watching the movie, the theme which stood out to me the most was the idea of an afterlife. It's a multiverse idea. There's one central generative universe. That's where the grand architect lives, in this magical house, and he uses magical blocks to build up the universe, or universes. And it is shown as a corridor with multiple doors on either side, and you can take those doors into different worlds, one of which is Mahito's, or our own world. And it is said that these parallel universes only exist for one day, yet we see that Mahito can live out his whole life. I think that entirety would be like one day for a grand creator. After which, it's like the idea of when a tree falls in the middle of the forest, does it make a sound? Or as some people say, the purpose of life is for us to observe the universe so it exists. Without anyone observing the universe, it would be like it doesn't exist. Who cares? It's the idea that you only get maybe one life to live. Afterward, nothing is guaranteed. And it's in line with Eastern philosophy. I read a little bit that in Japan, the main religions are Shintoism and Buddhism, and still, Japan is not a very religious country. The focus is more on this life as opposed to an afterlife. So I think Miyazaki, having lived into his 80s and saying this is his last project and expectedly putting his life wisdom into his work, I think the message would be, when there are no further guarantees, then live this life as best as you can. You have one life to live, make the best use of it. Another important theme is family and friends. Now, from the beginning of the movie, we see that Mahito has lost his mother at an early age. And if the universe is like a house, I think a mother would definitely be the main supporting pillar. If it falls, then the roof falls over a person's head, and their whole world crumbles and falls apart. This parallels the experience of Miyazaki in his own life, because he lost his mother at an early age too. And I read a quote from him. He said that he normally considers himself a pessimist, but that in his art, he's always trying to show kids that life is still worth living. Let's take a detour here from our main themes of family and friends, and turn a little bit to a third connecting theme, which is malice. It is inherent in the movie in that it is said that these building blocks the architect uses to create the world have malice woven into them. That's why he says he can't create a perfect or harmonious world. And again, I think this connects with the Eastern concept of yin and yang. There's always some good and some bad. How does malice show up in the individual? Someone like Mahito, he cannot accept his stepmom as his new mother, even though she treats him very well. Besides, he goes to school, he doesn't like his new environment, so what does he do? He uses a stone to hit himself on the head, make it look like someone else did that, so he doesn't have to go to school anymore. And again, I think that was an important issue of changing environments, but still a relatively minor one compared to what he did to himself. So I can understand the idea of malice in Mahito at the start, which he gets to change and improve upon. How do I understand malice in my own terminology? I would compare it to the idea of judging others, in that a person might think they're living well enough, that others are making mistakes, yet life is challenging, so that at some point everyone will make a mistake, and that's humbling, a humbling experience in its own right. So I think it is a lifelong endeavor to reduce this malice, and then also to stop judging others so much, and try to live as well as possible oneself. We'll take another detour here, and we're getting the Nestle Dolls effect. But our next theme is also very important. Everyone has to eat. And we see this in the movie with these wara wara creatures. They're like little marshmallows with faces on them, and they swell up like balloons and start flying off toward the sky. It is explained that they're actually spirits waiting to be reborn from the house world into other worlds, so they'll become people, let's say. And it's a miraculous moment when they're all up in the sky until a bunch of pelicans swoop in and gobble them up. And it's only a matter of time before they've finished their course that no spirits would be left, until a protectress steps forward and shoots up flames and brings the pelicans down. Well, one pelican steps forward to talk with Mahito, and we expect it to be a cruel and bad creature, but as it explains in its own words, they were actually sent from another world into this one, and they cannot eat any of the fish here. Their only food source is the wara wara. This parallels Japan, I think, around World War II. I did a little research into the history. It said that these Axis powers were feeling they were being squeezed by the great powers. On the other hand, they wanted to establish their own spheres of influence. We all know that history is written by the winners, so they're the ones, these Axis powers, that get the blame. They might say, but everyone was fighting, yet is not a full excuse. It's two-sided, you could say, as with the pelican. It knows that this is not the best solution, having to eat these wara wara, yet on the other hand, that's all it has available. And I cannot help but see this as somewhat of a bid for sympathy. Now we can get back to our main theme of family and friends. This is most clearly shown in the movie with Mahito reconciling with his stepmom, and from there onward, everything turns up for him. But even more drawn out examples for me, I think, were the relations with Mahito toward his friends. So these include the Heron, or what turns out to be the Birdman, as well as a few others that ended up getting stuck in the house world with Mahito. And several times he had the opportunity to leave the house world, get back to his own world, but each time he refused until he found all his friends, even though that's quite challenging. It would be like somebody being dropped somewhere randomly in this world and finding another person. So it was quite the hunt. But he was able to track down all his friends and find a way to get them all out. One person opening up opens up everyone else. So in reverse, this Birdman, who was not particularly thrilled with Mahito from the beginning, comes to be grateful for the friendship between them. He says, "Do you really consider me your friend?" It's a heartwarming moment. And afterward, he puts his whole effort on the line to save his friends. So he picks up everybody else and he bats his wings like a hummingbird with all his effort to fly them out of danger. And I think this is the answer the movie gives to the question of malice. There will always be challenges in life, but if we can keep our hearts open to love, family, and friendship, we can navigate them. To reflect a little bit on the artwork, The Boy and the Heron is a work of high fantasy. Usually when it comes to literature, we think Shakespeare, for example, it's more realism, so it's about normal people doing normal things, and they have a more direct message on human life, and we think they'll be more artistic. But on the other hand, Shakespeare does have works of fantasy, such as The Tempest or Macbeth, and we can see very clearly in this case with The Boy and the Heron that sometimes fantasy gives us more to think about than the usual realism. There are elements, as I mentioned, that I find curious in deep and dreamy anime, such as the kind that Miyazaki makes. Yet, if I knew what exactly it was about them that evoked my imagination, they wouldn't be curious anymore. So let's look into some of these elements. One is that characters don't always follow the normal codes of conduct. Sometimes they're in their own world. So at other times they can be overly emotional. They can express things like either they're really urgent or wonderful. Or they might fall unconscious and you don't know if it's passing or lasting, or have they gone into a different world? Are they dreaming now? You don't really know what's happening. They might wake up as if everything is normal. Or the rules sometimes seem to change. For example, the magical powers of a character, like flames, they could burn in one instance, in another they can be protective. The biggest element would be, in line with children's literature, When it comes to a child protagonist and narrator, we don't know how reliable they are. So Mahito, seeing the heron transform into the Birdman, is this actually happening or a figment of his imagination, the make-believe of a child? Versus seeing other characters for comparison, such as his parents, his father and stepmom. At times they're leading a charge toward the old abandoned house and castle. So obviously they felt something was off. I mean, normal adults wouldn't actually do this, right? So they seem to be affected by what is happening too. And then we see on the other side, from the house, characters stepping out into Mahito's world, but they change shapes. They could be big birds there, and here they come out as tiny little birds. So ineffectual. And the parents, the adults, are left wondering, what just happened? I thought something was there, but nothing happened. And I think we don't always get the answers in anime. We're not supposed to know everything. It's just supposed to evoke our imagination and be open to all these interpretations that are arising. In fact, art should be symbolic. The point is not to take an image you have in mind and change it to how it's usually represented on paper, because it will lose a bunch of elements and meaning. You want to put it down how you actually see it, and that's the challenge. And you might not completely understand it at first, but as you work with it more of its meaning reveals itself. It's like dream interpretation. You might have a dream and think it means one thing, but a psychologist will come up with a completely different reading. So too, art extends to the public, that the viewers or the readers might come up with completely different interpretations than what the artist thought. And all of these points are valid, and all of them contribute to the significance of the work of art. And if there are fantastic elements, such as colors and movement and sounds and music and shapes, these can add to the epicness of the work of art. Or if there are even grotesque elements, such as the birdman coming out from under the beak of the heron, or the pelicans or the parakeets, as I'll explain a little bit later. Here is where our work is waiting for us to uncover, on a subconscious level, what exactly is bothering us and what could be some of the solutions. But not everything has to make sense in writing. The point is not so much to moralize with direct messages as to create a good story that everyone can enjoy, like the fanciful games of imagination of children. It's much like Tolkien said about The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Above all, we write not to have written something, but to make a good story. Maybe is what we would enjoy hearing in front of a campfire. So I think we can all take a little influence from anime and Miyazaki to weave more fantasy and magical realism into our own art. That being said, I did have a recurring question throughout the movie, and it was, what is the meaning of the parakeets? In real life, they're small birds that people keep as pets. They're multicolored, they can sing a little bit, so they're quite cute and harmless. In the movie, they still look like that, but they were the size of people, so much more imposing. And you might think, these could be my friends, maybe take me where I'm supposed to go. But behind their backs, they carried these daggers, and they patrolled around, and their king did everything in his power to take the throne for himself. So it reminds of people that don't care so much about everything being done in the best way possible. They just want the credit for themselves. Never mind if it makes everyone else miserable. So we return to a main theme in Miyazaki's work, that appearances can be deceiving. On the one hand, he tells us that we should keep our hearts open toward love, family, and friends. On the other, he also adds, keep our eyes open for trouble so that we can navigate it carefully yet firmly. Mr. Miyazaki has famously announced his retirement with previous anime projects, and I hope that the pattern continues, even though he says this was his last one, that maybe in a few years he surprises us with yet another anime masterpiece.